Well, thanks very much, Nicola, and to the UUK for supporting this research and putting on this event. For those of you that don't know, I'm Ed Cox, Director of IPPR North. IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research, is a Westminster-based think tank, but I think it's fairly unique in having a dedicated northern office, and I head up that operation. We do research on a wide range of issues, from community and social renewal through to localism, local government, and lots of work now on economic development. And we're currently running a 18-month-long Northern Economic Futures Commission, which will be putting out an interim report in the near future and finally reporting in November, setting out, we hope, a 10-year strategy for economic growth across the north of England. So the work that we've been doing in partnership with UUK, and this work that I'm going to describe for you now, sits very much alongside the broad attention that we're trying to give to how we ensure that northern prosperity is national prosperity. But the work that we're looking at today looks at the contribution of universities to economic development across the regions throughout England. So we're going to be focusing not just on the north this morning in what I've got to say. And what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the context, secondly to talk about some of the different dimensions of universities' contribution to regional economic development, and then I want to share a few thoughts that we've come up with around how we maximise the way in which we can increase universities' contribution to local economic development. And I'm hoping then that the panel members will give a bit of rootedness to that, and no doubt in our conversations then later on you will also challenge and develop and build on some of the ideas that we're sharing here. See if I could move on. So first, few comments about context. I think we're already conscious of lots of different graphs like this which set out regional economic development between the different regions and show that whilst there has been GVA growth in all regions over the last decade or so, in actual fact it's been growing faster in London and the South East than it has been in other regions, and therefore the gap, the GVA gap as they say, is therefore growing. And then to quickly put up a graph showing how public spending cuts and the cut in jobs in particular are likely to impact those areas with the greatest levels of unemployment. We can see that actually the situation is highly likely to be exacerbated. When we think about the drivers of growth, things like skilled workers, it's clear too that there are big disparities between different regions across the UK. This is a graph showing highly skilled workers and how the top line shows London, and you can see then other regions falling below that. And this being a key driver of economic growth suggests that, again, the gap is likely to widen still further. And then finally, a graph showing key drivers of growth in relation to research and development expenditure. And you can see here the top line here is USA. This next line is Germany. UK's expenditure on research and development significantly lower, and then China catching up. And there's quite an interesting statistic that if we were to raise in the UK our research and development expenditure in the regions to the regional average, then we would actually narrow this gap or close this gap entirely with the USA and Germany. So all the context suggests that at the moment the gap between the regions in terms of productivity is going to grow. And then alongside this, last slide on context, we have perceived that there is a general centralisation of economic development policy, particularly following the closure of the regional development agencies. On the left-hand side here, things like the Regional Growth Fund, which is now essentially centrally distributed, inward investment, many functions now going back to UKTI in London, business support, innovation, and now the European funding for 2014 onwards to be decided essentially through Whitehall. All of these issues essentially the centralisation of economic development policy over against the things that we hear a lot about, local enterprise partnerships, city deals, where there does appear to be a tendency towards greater local decision making. And again, perhaps later we can debate the extent to which we do think there is a centralisation of economic development policy going on at the present time. So all that by way of context. Then I want to just explore now some of the things that we have said in the report about how universities can contribute to regional economic growth. And there are 7 different factors that we've outlined that you can see here. Firstly, direct and indirect expenditure through students, buildings, workers, that kind of thing. Provision of skills and skilled workers. Universities' ability to attract inward investment. How universities facilitate what we're calling the innovation ecosystem. Workforce development for local firms in particular, the whole issue of business startups and how you commercialise research, and then finally the civic leadership role. So I'm going to offer just a couple of comments on each of those, and you'll forgive me if I rattle through some of these, but there's not enough time to dwell too long on any one of them. So first of all then, in terms of direct and indirect expenditure, as I say, students, student expenditure, buildings, the workforce within universities, these are all ways in which universities clearly contribute to the local and regional economy. I think it's UUK stats that say that it's approximately 1% of the UK workforce works within universities, but if you look at knock-on employment from universities, you can double that figure. If you look at university output, for every £1 million of university output, a further 1.38 million is generated in the wider economy. But I think we've got to take care when we look at figures around direct and indirect expenditure for 3 reasons. Firstly, there's a difference between supporting demand, and these figures all suggest that there's demand, versus supporting growth in the regional economy. I think it's true also to say that if government was looking at every single pound that it spent and where it can get the greatest multiplier effect, there are other sectors where you might get a greater multiplier effect than the universities sector. So we mustn't see it as that it's a very sort of simplistic, oh well, there's a multiplier, therefore it's a good thing. And also the multiplier works both ways. So as we see university funding contract, so we see that has a wider spin-off within the wider local economy as well. So let's just have a bit of caution about the extent to which direct and indirect expenditure can be a positive as well as a negative influence. Secondly, looking at skills and the way in which universities can both attract a skilled workforce but also provide a skilled workforce to the local and regional economy. A very interesting table that we've pulled together here shows that there's actually no relationship between the economic strength of a particular region and its ability to retain its graduates. And this would suggest then that a university in a local or regional economy can genuinely be a boost to underperforming regions. Very often I think it's assumed that in an underperforming region graduates will just leave. This shows that after their first degree, for at least 6 months after graduation, that actually graduates do stay in a region. And actually North East, North West Yorkshire and Humber come up top of that particular league. Looking then at inward investment, it's very hard to quantify the way in which universities can attract inward investment. But clearly one of the important things about universities is their ability, if you like, to anchor inward investment. Where private companies are able to bring in investment but then leave again, most universities have a sense of local anchoring, so to speak, and therefore any investment that goes into a company, into a university, is likely to stay. And the OECD, for example, say that actually universities are far more effective than financial incentives for bringing in foreign direct investment. Also, it's key in terms of linking a local or regional economy to the wider global economy, both in terms of exports, but also in terms of bringing in foreign students and researchers. And key to inward investment, it would appear, are things like science parks and other initiatives that universities take in order to attract foreign firms to come and locate nearby. In terms of innovation, The university sector is clearly a key asset for UK innovation, whether that's our labs, whether it's our intellectual property, our incubators, and so on. And this is especially true in relation to science and technology. I think Sarah Jackson from N8 Universities was telling me about the new industry innovation forum that's been set up, and the way in which private companies are now coming together with universities in order to collaborate around different issues in order to innovate, to help private companies innovate. And I think there's some good opportunities, and there's clearly some good results here. This graph shows the effects of university involvement in collaborating with businesses reporting that where there has been some university involvement, it has a very positive effect on their product range, on their market share, and on the quality of the goods and services that they're producing. So clearly it's worthwhile, and I think there's real scope here to broaden it beyond science and technology, perhaps into other products, other service sectors as well. So there's clearly opportunities here. However, if we look at businesses' perception of collaboration with a variety of different partners, it shows on this graph here that universities come well down the league table. In fact, businesses are more likely to collaborate with competitors than they are with universities. So I think there's some scope to improve on that front. And then if we look at income, on the left-hand side, university income from contract research. The light blue blocks are income from public and third sector contracts, and here from consultancy. But on the left-hand side, you can see SMEs, tiny amounts of money, large businesses, again, falling between 2008 here and 2009-10 here, and again, falling in terms of consultancy income as well. So we're actually talking about just £300 million from contract research with large businesses, and less than £50 million across all the universities from consultancy income with SMEs in the 2009-10 period, which is really a very small amount of money. And also, quite clearly, a huge opportunity to diversify income going forward into the future. And then, in terms of university engagement with businesses, it's clear that there's a need to, if you like, lower the cost, lower the barriers to businesses engaging with universities. And so we looked at different practices, if you like, about how universities can engage with businesses of different kinds. And here you can see the majority of universities do have some kind of inquiry point for SMEs. There is some bespoke courses for businesses on businesses' own premises, and then also distance learning for businesses, and a contracting system for all consultancy, which is actually increasing. But broadly speaking, since 2004, those business practices, those business engagement practices, are fairly flat. They're only gently rising. So it would again appear that universities could do quite a lot more in this regard. Next, looking at workforce development, again, looking at the way in which universities have generated income from continuing professional development activities, again, sort of quite limited in terms of growth since 2006-07. And again, I'll just draw your attention to CPD with small and medium-sized enterprises, again, really quite limited. No, I think I'll move on, otherwise I'm going to get bogged down. So startups, another key area for universities to engage with their local economy. They're quite small as a proportion of overall UK startups, and they tend to be very much concentrated on the high value sectors, and I think we're going to be hearing later from Nanoco about their particular example. But I was completely surprised by the stats that we started in 2000 from just 179 graduate startups across 27 different universities in the year 2000, and that by 2009 had only risen to 2,045 startups across 75 universities. So clearly there's huge scope for developing that field. And in terms of graduates who are self-employed 6 months after graduation, it was only 1.5% in 2000, and that's only risen to 4.5% in 2010. And there, I think, is a need to look at the extent to which enterprise support initiatives, which I know there are here at Manchester and elsewhere at other universities, are effective in actually enabling graduates to go into setting up their own businesses. And then finally, in terms of university's contribution to the local economy, is the whole role of civic leadership, which I think can be a bit nebulous in terms of its conception. Different ways in which we can look at it, about how universities link between place and applied research, particularly linking up with the public sector. No doubt Sir Howard will have comments about how this relates in terms of Manchester, how university promotes access and inclusion, how it links business and product development to its activities. Also issues such as academic and student volunteering are key to, if you like, anchoring a university within its local context, and perhaps most importantly of all, the way in which it forms partnerships with other local institutions and agencies. But amazingly, even though I would say most universities would claim to have some notion of civic leadership as part of its mission, only 4% see this as a priority for their mission, and over a third don't really see any geographical area as being part of what they are about. And then if we look at universities' plans to engage more with communities, to engage more with businesses, again, most of them do offer, if you like, some sense of wanting to engage, but actually a fair number have very few plans, strategic plans for business support or for public and community engagement, or for providing incentives for staff to be able to engage more widely. Now, we tried to pull all of these different dimensions into some kind of analysis which would enable us to explore the different characteristics, if you like, that different universities had, to see if there were patterns amongst universities against these different characteristics, and to see whether different kinds of universities placed emphasis on different ways in which they could engage with the local economy. And what we found was it's impossible to create a kind of clear typology that different universities form this type or that type of engagement with their wider economy. But what we were able to do was to look at the way in which different universities will have a different mix of roles. And so out of that, we used some cluster analysis in order to do this. We identified clusters of universities that were, if you like, skills and knowledge creators, where they would upskill their local workforce, where they attract skilled workers. We found another cluster of universities that you could describe as university towns, where they have a very strong role in creating local demand for goods and services, where they do catalyse business startups and provide research and consultancy for businesses locally and further afield. We found another cluster around what you might call local developers, where they assist local firms and create local demand for goods and services. Others that were perhaps slightly bigger, looking at as investment attractors, where they generate income, attract knowledge and workers, and significant inward investment from outside of the area. And a fifth cluster of what we call local entrepreneurs, where they work with local firms in areas through activities such as continuing professional development and developing business startups. And what we were able to do through identifying these clusters was then look at the extent to which any one particular university might have different aspects of this mix. So we did that through this radar chart, and you can look in more depth within the report itself as to how this works. But a university, for example, University A here, will have lots of engagement within its local economy, lots of local demand and so on, involvement with the skills and knowledge creation, and lots of involvement with in terms of its local entrepreneurship role, whereas another university might be much more focused on the attraction of inward investment, while still having aspects of the other roles. And I think it's quite important, and the reason we developed this this radar, this way of looking at universities is particularly to enable local institutions, local enterprise partnerships and others to have a way to reflect on the different universities that might operate within their area, within their local economy, and think through the extent to which they actually can maximise and develop the dimensions that that university can bring to the local economy. Finally then, I just want to offer some thoughts about how we build on the situation that we've described. I want to do this in looking at three different sets of actors: the government, universities, and then local enterprise partnerships, and what each of them need to be able to do. And so firstly, in terms of government, there's a strong sense in which the way in which innovation funding is increasingly if you like, controlled and directed by central government, now that the RDAs have been abolished, that needs to some extent be relocalised through collaborations of universities working with local enterprise partnerships in different ways. This is particularly true, I think, in terms of the role that the TSB is now playing, and also in terms of the way in which European structural funds are going to be playing out in the future, and the need, if you like, for universities to have a much greater voice within some of the debates around European funding. I think too, government needs to have a clearer understanding that the impact of its changes to university funding will have different effects depending on the kind of university and the role that that university plays within the local economy. And I think we're particularly concerned about some of the skills and knowledge creator type universities and the impact that that government funding cuts are going to have, or funding changes are going to have on those universities. In terms of universities maximising their role, we feel that there's plenty of opportunities, as I've described already, for them to build on their existing contribution to regional economic growth, particularly through the expansion of their business engagement activities, whether that's through business clubs, workforce development programmes, spin-outs, and so on. We've, as I've already said, think that there needs to be some greater evaluation of student enterprise support schemes and the way in which they're working so that we can draw out good practice there. And we're particularly struck by the very positive role that universities have played in relation to regional growth fund bids. I think 5 out of the first 45 that were selected by government had university leadership at the heart of what they were about. Another 18 I think had some kind of university collaboration as part of their successful winning formula. And so I think that's quite key that we build on that success. And also we think that there's huge opportunity for more proactive engagement with local public services, particularly around the work programme and how universities might link up with work programme providers and explore links and relationships there. And then my final slide is just to look at how we maximise opportunities from the local economic partnership perspective. Now, just a sort of quick caveat on this. Whether it's the partnership itself, whether it's the LEP area, I think depends on the way in which those institutions and structures are developing in each locality. I'm very much very conscious of the fact that in some areas the LEP is very strong, in other areas they're much weaker. And so I think the question is how do you enable local institutions, if you like, who have responsibility for economic development to engage with universities? Well, I think the first message to those kind of institutions is to properly map and understand the diversity of the university contribution to the local economy. So I think there's some onus on them to actually understand the kinds of universities and the roles they're playing within the economy. Secondly, to actually see if we can challenge the involvement, challenge universities to have a greater involvement in local economic development issues where that's possible. I think particularly looking at university collaboration, the way in which different universities might play different roles within the economy and how they actually relate to one another. And then, of course, fundamentally on building business and university collaboration and the way in which that LEPs, for example, could be the ones to actually bring together some of those partnerships in order to address local economic issues. Right, so I'll stop there. No doubt that's plenty for people to get their teeth stuck into. I'm very happy to answer questions about the report and to enable a discussion about some of these quite big issues that I think we're raising. but I very much hope you'll contribute to that. I'm now going to pass over to each member of the panel to offer some comments on the report, but also offer some comments from their own perspective on the way in which universities in Manchester in particular are engaging with this agenda. So first of all, I'll pass over to Dame Nancy Rothwell. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I first of all say a warm welcome to the University of Manchester and welcome to this report, which I think is most appropriate for both the city, the region and the universities of Manchester. There's no doubt that both universities and the economy of the country and the structure are undergoing great changes. But in thinking about this report, I went back to something that we commissioned in 2004, which was a study of the economic benefit of a world-class university. And it's interesting that some of the summaries of this are very much what is in the current IPPR report. For example, a central role in the development of a cultural corridor in Manchester of international significance. Significant contribution to building and sustaining Manchester's international profile and brand. Contribution to economy of the region. But interestingly, in this report, at the time, the University of Manchester had an income of 500 million. And the prediction was that by 2015, which was a sort of anchor time for us, it would be 750 million. Well, in 2010-11, it exceeded 800 million. So even back then, the demonstration of the economic benefit of a university was very much in our sights, and I think is ever more so now. The report particularly focuses on something that I think is very important for Greater Manchester, and we do tend to talk about Greater Manchester rather than just the city, which is the role of partnerships. And that is partnerships between university, partnerships between the universities and, in our case, the combined authorities, and partnerships with the LEP, which I'll come back to in a moment. And just a few examples of those, and where I think they have been and will continue to be successful, is the corridor, a partnership with the city, the two universities, the Central Manchester Trust, down Oxford Road, Beacon for Public and Community Engagement with the three universities in Manchester, Manchester Science Park, many more. I was particularly surprised to see in the report that only 12% of universities stated that community engagement was core to their mission. It's absolutely core to our mission. In fact, it's a major part of one of the three goals of the University of Manchester. And that community engagement is obviously particularly locally, but also more widely. And our goal 3, which is termed social responsibility, is specifically about public and community engagement. And that community includes the business community. So we certainly welcome some of the recommendations for those partnerships. I think universities have in the past largely looked inwards, and it's a time now that we should increasingly look outwards. We're changing from largely public to much more private organisations than we were in the past, and outwards, of course, includes international as well as regional and national, and we will always seek to be a strong international organisation. But I think the strength of universities in a region like this very much builds on the strength of the civic partnership and the strength of the partnership with business. Universities have traditionally looked to business engagement as a source of income, and interestingly, the numbers put up here do reflect income. And that's not trivial. But I was struck by a presentation the other day by Herman Hauser, who's a very notable entrepreneur, who pointed out that in the United States, 2% of income of universities comes from commercialization. But that's not to say it isn't incredibly important, because a role for universities is ensuring delivery of discoveries towards economic benefit of the region and indeed of the country. I'm personally a member of the Greater Manchester LEP, and although it's still in its infancy, I think it does have some real teeth. I think it is starting to get to grips with the real problems of the region, in which the universities play a key part. And we are looking at the real drivers for economic growth in this region, whether it's knowledge, which of course universities are intimately involved with, skills development, again intimately involved, but also businesses, inward investment, communities, housing, transport. These are things that should, even if they don't always, appear high on the radar for universities. And I'm very pleased and very proud that we live in a region that is noted both historically and currently for its generation of knowledge and innovation. And I don't need to remind you probably that the centre of the Industrial Revolution, we hope will continue to be a driver for economic growth for the United Kingdom, and that the universities will play a key part in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. So Howard, Chief Executive of Manchester City Council.
Yes, thanks very much. Try and add to Nancy's contribution, really. What I think I'd like to do, really, is just focus on two or three themes. First of all, the world post RDAs. I think the impression could be created from, admittedly, only a cursory analysis of your report, that everything was hunky-dory while the RDAs were actually in place, really. We still ran a heavily centralised process around economic development, research and intelligence. RDAs effectively were a postbox for the execution of that strategy. One of the reasons why I think RDA's moving on and moving to a much more focused city region agenda is, I believe, it is going to be more possible to drive that spatial focus where economic strategy is concerned. For me, I think there are opportunities which we need to grip going forward, which provide a much stronger capability at city region level to be able to drive places like Greater Manchester so that we become part of a national recovery going forward. That's the first point. The second point is, I noticed too from the report there was almost no reference to local authorities at all. Not just because I'm employed by a local authority, I think that is a fundamentally flawed part of the analysis, frankly. Local authorities are absolutely key to creating places where people want to live, where people want to work, and where people want to invest. Local enterprise partnerships are, I think, fundamentally about how local authorities working with different stakeholders, including business, can actually create a very strong direction, a very strong framework for growth. Local authorities are about how you execute and deliver that growth, working with a number of stakeholders at a local level. And I think here, Greater Manchester and Manchester are, in my view, in a very strong and robust position. One, because of the quality and depth of the partnerships that exist at a local level. Nancy has already referred to the corridor partnership which John chairs, and I'm sure John will say a few words about that, but also, very specifically, the quality of the partnership at Greater Manchester level as well. And it is worth just pausing about the significance of that partnership. That is about how 10 local authorities have come to recognise that growth is not about local authority boundaries, it's about the operation of a single labour market. And fundamentally, it's about how we collaborate and ensure that our policies around planning, housing, transport, and economic development are properly integrated in order to deliver the key economic priorities for this city region. And we are unique in Greater Manchester. There is no other statutory body in place which is capable of actually discharging that role. And that leads me to the third point. We are currently in an engagement with government. It's called the Cities Deal. I hope to see significant progress made over the next few weeks, but as part of that Cities Deal, I think it's important to understand some of the propositions which business and local authorities and other stakeholders in Manchester are actually communicating to government at this time. One is about you cannot deliver a growth strategy simply through national delivery models. They have to be spatially focused. And if you can't spatially focus growth on places like Greater Manchester, there is absolutely no prospect of rebalancing our national economy. That's point number one. Point number two, if Greater Manchester is to continue to deliver its full economic potential, we have to place as much emphasis on science and innovation as we do in terms of how we create a more locally focused infrastructure which engages business of all shapes and sizes going forward. And I know from the conversations which we're currently having with government ministers, and I know by virtue of the work Nancy in particular, who has led this debate, is that very, very few other cities actually see science and innovation in quite the same way as I think we need to. And thirdly, no matter how well we challenge ourselves, and we will constantly challenge ourselves about how we get better at focusing on opportunities, how we get better in commercialising new discoveries, fundamentally we also have to continue to challenge government, because one of the most important requirements, I believe, is that we start to move away from this domination of southeastern bias where research expenditure and other similar types of enterprise is done, and I cannot believe that we can actually do that without fundamentally reviewing some of the conventions which now become almost rules of law in this country, that only scientists can make independent decisions. Well, if those independent decisions effectively means that the vast majority of research expenditure is going to be deployed in London and the South East, by definition that has to change.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. Our next panel contribution is from Professor John Brooks, who's Vice-Chancellor of Manchester Metropolitan University. John.
Thanks, Ed. I mean, there's a great danger that we violently agree here. I think the demise of the RDAs, of course, took away a layer of infrastructure which focused upon the region, and I think one of our challenges is to replace something that's appropriate and fit for purpose. I think we now recognise that that is based around cities and city regions, and the importance of Greater Manchester has already been emphasised. I mean, I have the pleasure of chairing the corridor Manchester, and I have to say it is a pleasure, and it brings together private sector, the universities, the city council, in a way that I've not experienced a partnership working in the past. And for me, that's one of the great joys of working in Manchester. And when I first came here, I had a look at a plan that was around at the turn of the previous century, which was the Manchester Education Plan. And actually, you can see that that plan has stood for 120 years and really contains within it, even in the 1900s, all of the elements of partnership working that make, I think, Manchester a dynamic and interesting place to grow. The corridor is actually unambiguous about what it's there for. Of course, it's part of our innovation ecosystem, but it's about attracting and retaining world-class people, because world-class people create wealth, and therefore you get all of the good social things associated with that. So we're absolutely clear about that, and I think it works in a variety of different ways which we can explore. I think we're also quite fortunate. In Manchester we happen to have the two largest campus-based universities in the UK, each with about 38,500 students, both very popular universities, so Manchester has got itself a very strong brand around higher education. If I take MMU as an example, I think we have more than 75 professional bodies that accredit our degree programmes. We're very vocationally focused. 9,000 graduates a year, 82% of them stay and work in the Northwest. And if you need to get underneath some of the data that Ed looked at, because actually there's another parameter which he didn't measure, which is how you attract undergraduates to study in your city. So actually the proportion that leave is irrelevant. You need to look at the flow, and it's a supply chain argument. And that's why the South East in some senses is successful, but it's massively unsuccessful in use of public funding to support the knowledge economy. Massively bad at that. So actually you need to look underneath that. So the higher skills agenda is obviously vitally important, and of course it's not just undergraduate, it is the CPD work, and I actually disagree with some of the data because I think it doesn't quite look at the role of work-based learning that a lot of universities are developing. We work with about half a dozen major national bodies providing work-based in-house company training, but it's hidden because it's described as, under hefty terms, foundation degree development. So it's not counted in the commercial sense. But if you take one example that springs to my New York bank, Mellon, the City of Manchester made a major drive to attract that bank to come to Manchester's head office. What was one of the deciding factors was that we were able to provide training for all of their staff, and a package was put together. So I think we need to be very aware of that. The support for innovation and enterprise, I think, has already been emphasised, but let me just say that we're working with Goldman Sachs on their national scheme of 10,000 high-growth companies. We're into our second cohort of 25 SMEs across the Northwest, and these are focused upon the future growth SMEs. And these are the very hard to reach companies that have got through their initial phase and now looking to grow. And that's very, very exciting. Around graduate incubators, I mean, we actually have our own inner space where we've got 120 micro SMEs alive and surviving past 12 months. And I think that's the important measure, because it's rather easy to start them, keeping them going. And of course the Science Park has been very successful. Around applied research and technology transfer, I think the University of Manchester is world leading in that sense. And I think we have a support role, we have an applied research role, and I think around knowledge transfer, we haven't said very much about that, but it's still very, very important at a regional and sub-regional level. The direct support for the local economy, again, two massive universities. I mean, our university, MMU, contributes £800 million per annum directly to the local economy. We are 3/4 of the way through a capital programme of £360 million. And we were just talking earlier over coffee about you can measure the economic growth of a city by counting the number of cranes that you can see above the skyline. And there are actually just 3 clusters of cranes in Manchester at the moment. They're associated with the University of Manchester, MMU, and the Co-op. And that's, I just, look at the clusters of high intensity, high-rise cranes in your cities, and you'll know how well your economy is doing. So I think it's very, very important. Let me say one thing, and this has gone off the agenda, but local employment associated with those is very, very important. There was something called the Local Employment Partnership, which was introduced in the death throes of Labour, but actually it's a very valuable device. Now, we adopted that within the Oxford Road corridor and made that one of our absolute priorities, because it's all very well spending money in capital programmes, but if it actually flies out and ends up in Germany and elsewhere providing materials, then actually what's the benefit? So the 2 universities have collaborated over something called the Works. The city gave us a building, we provided the IT, I think Nancy provided a member of staff, and that organisation has provided 1,000 jobs for local people over the past 2.5 years. Now, not all of those are permanent, but their first step for long-term worklessness people coming from Hume and Moss Side, some of the most disadvantaged areas in Manchester. So it was very, very important for us that if you're into wealth creation, there's no point in you turning your backs on the most disadvantaged groups that share your city. So that was very, very important to us. And I think sometimes the things that are at least easy to quantify are actually the most important to the long-term health and social vibrancy. So that leads me almost finally to what I believe is actually one of the most important aspects and somewhat invisible. It's the impact on culture, society, well-being and sustainability. Because actually without those, you can have lots of wealth creation and your society falls apart. And I think we saw touches of that quite recently. Give you one example, we organise the annual Children's Book Festival. It's actually headed by the Poet Laureate, Caroline Duffy, who's had the pleasure of being on my staff. It lasts 11 days. There are more than 40 events, and thousands of school children are brought in from the most disadvantaged schools across Greater Manchester to have an experience of being read to by their authors and seeing the artists that have created the characters that they love. And that I think is a very, very important aspect of university engagement. Society and well-being is vital. And we've had projects, because we're developing a new campus in Hume, deliberately chosen because it will be a community-based campus integrating with the local community. And so we've had Hume regeneration projects, we've had arts and history in Hume, and we've had a raising education attainment, because actually it's meaningless to talk about post-16, higher education engagement in Hume, because there is no post-16 education. So our challenge is to actually raise ambition in groups and communities where there is no role model for higher education. So that, I think, is a very, very important aspect. And of course, environmental sustainability is the big challenge. And if universities cannot take a lead on that, who is going to take a big lead on that? Because this is a shared civic responsibility. And I'm pleased to say that the corridor has been able to take a very strong lead in that area, both in terms of coordinating projects that link across the partners, and one of those is, for example, around clean transport, around improving bus connectivity. We're investing in a fleet of electric cars for all of our local placement work. We have projects which Nancy and I have worked on combined heat and power schemes, which are looking towards being able to facilitate a network of CHP to obviously reduce our carbon footprint in the future. We're working also on various schemes around green roofs and zero water and zero waste. And we have something called the Manchester Lab, which is a joint project between the two universities, which turns the whole of Manchester into a living laboratory with appropriate data connection and transmission. It means we can study everything around transport, around the environment, around clean technology, the sustainability of refurb projects and so on. And we're working with Siemens on that as part of a Technology Innovation Campus proposal. What about the future, which we were asked to comment on? Well, who knows? I think it's very clear that here we think the importance of city regions is vital because they will drive economic growth. I think the Oxford Road Corridor is something I'm putting a lot of effort and energy into, and I think the city is doing so as well. I think public-private partnerships do work, but you do need local authorities in there with you. And actually, one of the strengths in Manchester is that it was the vision of the City of Manchester that actually enabled the universities to work in those partnerships. So I think it was that way around. It's important to recognise that. And it's all about people. It is about attracting people, retaining them, because they create the knowledge, they create the wealth. They will then ultimately create the wealth to support disadvantaged communities. I think the central issue is whether or not we can influence national policy, because national policy is not supporting the city regions as proactively, as positively as they could do. The arguments around the southeast and the economic dominance of the southeast is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if all the large research contracts, all the head offices are based in the southeast, and it's inevitably going to be that case. So I think we have to challenge there. We have to get greater understanding around the regions and the cities. And there is a slight vacuum left by the demise of the RDA. We've lost the Northwest University Association. So that network that previously, not perfectly, but at least used to work to support the region, we have to think about ways of replacing that. And I think the LEP has a very important role. But for me, it will be about the micro ecosystems, which I think the Oxford Road Corridor, they will be the future. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, John. And our final panel speaker this morning is Dr. Michael Edelman, who's the Chief Executive of Nanoco Group plc.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just maybe 30 seconds on Nanoco for people who don't know. We're a high-tech nanomaterials spin-out at the University of Manchester Chemistry Department. We started there in early 2000 in a converted men's toilet. In 2005, we formally raised finance, spun out, and are now about 67 people, 13 nationalities, growing very rapidly. We make fluorescent semiconductors, which are used in next generation lighting, solar cell and television systems. All our customers are large Asian-based electronics companies. We are determined to manufacture. We built our first manufacturing facility in Runcorn, which opened about a year ago, hiring aggressively. The types of people we hire are the best and brightest technical people from around the world. And when we look, so we're a spin out of the university, and we're always looking at what services we can get from the university or in the area. So where I come at this report is, one is I believe that universities can add a huge amount of value to the city. The question is how? And if I bring it down to a granular level, how can university help a company like mine or attract other companies? We tend to be very, very ruthless about what we do and services we use. We don't have time to enter into prolonged negotiations to try and figure out what services we should and shouldn't use. To increase, our view, or my view perhaps, is to increase the partnership with private sector. The university is already doing a lot of things very well, but it needs to focus, or the universities need to focus, understand what they do well, and then continue to focus. And really, if they're good at science and technology, continue to focus on innovation, generation of knowledge, generation of technology. But you can't do everything. You can't be all things to all people. So becoming really good at what you do. Adding value to students. I mean, I was saying we recruit with 13 nationalities in a tiny company. It's very expensive for us to bring people in from the States, to bring people in from China. It really is expensive. You know, our average salary in the company is probably approaching £50,000. And then to bring someone in, you double that up, the cost of bringing them in that initial year. If we could take local people out of the universities, that would be a great advantage to us, a great cost savings to us. So adding value to students, but what I mean there is universities really focusing on teaching better. You know, really, you know, in Manchester, you know, to get into Manchester, the science area in Manchester, you require 3 A's or A's and A stars. How do you make those already super bright people in the UK better, so people like me want to hire them? And that's, you know, that's so focusing on the teaching. It would be useful on a very practical front, once you've made them better, to figure out how we can access them. You know, how do we know where to go? You know, some centralized recruiting that's able to match industrial needs with what university has to offer. Offering of high quality services. Some universities are very good. So in my area, science and technology, we buy a lot of analytical services from universities. We don't buy from University of Manchester. We buy from others. So some universities are very good at doing it. Others are less. It's not to say that this university doesn't have the capability. It does. It has all the right people and the machines. It just needs to sort out the service. There are other things. You know, we talked, and the report talks about lowering the cost or the barriers to entry for industry to engage with the university. And this is where I was talking about us being very ruthless. We don't have a lot of time. We're trying to get a lot of stuff done. You know, Nanoco has gone from a value of nothing, you know, in a men's toilet. We're now, you know, London Stock Exchange listed, you know, valued at somewhere between 120, 140 million pounds. So the company is moving quickly. We don't have time, though, to negotiate for 6 months with the university in a complicated contract. So figuring out a way to simplify the process to engage. Improving the environment for spin-out creation. I'm from California. I'm not from here, as you probably hear. You know, in California, especially Silicon Valley, there's a whole, and this is not a local, you know, this is not a local issue. This is a national issue. How do you reduce risk? How do you encourage people to take that risk, to go and, you know, risk their house, to, you know, start a company, to take that jump? And in the UK, it's, you know, the numbers, as you saw in the report, are very small, 1% growing to 4%. And the government today keeps talking about all the growth is coming from SMEs. You know, this is where we, you know, it's no longer, you know, the large corporations, it's SMEs. We want you all to start companies. Well, how do you encourage people to take that risk to do that? And this is more of a government, you know, issue, but one is incentivization through tax systems. So this is not a Manchester issue, but a taxation issue. Simple things like bringing back capital gains taper relief. You want people who are taking that risk, who are going to create companies, who are going to employ a lot of people, you want them to do really well. You want to see people get wealthy based on knowledge, based on whatever in your area, because they're creating jobs. And what you see over and over again in California or my you know, Silicon Valley is you see this huge recycling of wealth. So you see the Google guys creating a company, you know, that spun out of Stanford. So Stanford had some equity, they made a bit of money there. But if you actually go on Google Maps and look how many buildings are Google in the Palo Alto area, there are about 48 buildings now. Facebook, you know, they're hiring 1,000 people, you know, a year. So this is huge influx of people coming into the region. And these people have become, and it's in the news now, Mark Zuckerberg is going to be worth 25 billion. I mean, they're hugely wealthy, but then a lot of that money often gets recycled back. And you know, if you see story after story of people who made money, who are then writing checks and investing straight back into companies to allow that system, that ecosystem to keep regenerating. So somehow we need to try and create that in the UK. Back to the Manchester level, I think Manchester, I spend about, I have for the last 7 years, I spend about a week a month in Asia, because that's where our business is. Manchester is held in very, very high regard. Really very, very high regard in Asia, beyond the football teams. I mean, they all like the football teams, and part of our tour is, you go to the different football teams. But how do you, again, if the University of Manchester is held in very high regard, and if the university is able to offer services, lower the barriers to entry to engaging with it, and attract large corporations, who's the next Siemens? It's probably coming out of, Korea, it's coming out of China, it's coming out of Taiwan, attracting those organizations into Manchester. And it can be as small as them setting up a 10-person lab here, and then growing that and developing that. That becomes, Hong Ho's bridgehead into Europe. But you need to be able to attract them, and you need to do that by offering them the services that they don't, they can come in a lower cost manner. So, I don't know, I'm sure, I know the city, I think probably has people out in Korea, out in China, engaging with these companies. I don't know whether the university does as well. So, my view is there's a lot of stuff that the university already does, and it's figuring out what that is, what it's really good at today, and improving it. And I don't think it's something that takes a huge amount of extra money. I think it's just focusing on, let's pick the really good things, the systems that people want, let's make those really good, and get out there and sell Manchester. Thank you.
Great.